Welcome to Pat's Cast. Is Drake Maye now the front runner to win the NFL MVP? Didn't expect to be saying that at this point in time. Maybe year 3, we're talking about him making a leap and being one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but he already is one of the best, and the numbers certainly don't lie. And, my expectation heading into the season was, I hope Drake Maye is around that, top 10 NFL category. Maybe looking on the outside, but in the conversation, everyone assumes he's the franchise QB of the future. Kind of the way we talked about Justin Herbert after a year or two. Similar raw traits, coming into his own as an NFL veteran over time. And look, I got to be honest, I've for some reason watched a lot of Justin Herbert this season, just whether it's on Red Zone or I think the Chargers have been in a lot of primetime games. And I watch him play after watching the Patriots and Drake Maye play, and I sit there going like, Drake Maye is a better quarterback. At the very least, he's a better decision maker and doesn't hold on to the ball too long, which was a big problem last year and at the beginning of this season. And I watched Justin Herbert out there, and I say, Maye's a better quarterback already. And there's a reason why he has made the leap in the NFL betting odds. From the start of the season, he was plus 6,600 to win the NFL MVP, and now he's just plus 500. Now, he isn't the front runner in most betting markets, but he is either number 2 or number 3. As of right now, the consensus seems to be he's third in line in terms of sports betting. Number 1 is Patrick Mahomes at plus 140, which means there's about a 42% chance people think he's going to win the MVP, way ahead of everyone else. Josh Allen plus 350, about 22%. And then Drake Maye, plus 500, about a 16% chance. But you have to realize that the Mahomes odds are just kind of baked in, right? The numbers so far for Patrick Mahomes don't show that he is the best quarterback in the NFL, but the momentum the Chiefs have built up the last month or so, winning football games, even though they're, I think, still on the outside of the playoff picture in the AFC, many picked them, including myself, to be the team to beat in the AFC. So Mahomes is going to get that, right? And he certainly has probably a better supporting cast than Drake Maye. But just seeing what Drake Maye has done this season, week after week, improving, whether it's just being accurate and throwing the football, making better decisions, his footwork, moving up in the pocket, making sure he doesn't fumble the ball. I know last week, he threw an INT and had a strip fumble when he was in the pocket stepping up. But for the most part, he went, 4 weeks in a row without a turnover? He's been excellent out there, and he has been the best quarterback in the NFL at least 8 weeks into the season, in my opinion. When you factor in what he has to work with, the fact he has a new coaching staff, basically a brand new offensive line, and you look at some of the other MVP frontrunners, they're much more built to be Super Bowl contenders. And I think the Patriots might be when all is said and done. But I think that is the real case for Drake Maye, is that he's in year 2 of his career. He's working on what was considered a rebuilding team, now potentially a Super Bowl contender, and he is putting up the best numbers in the NFL. Right now, he leads the league in probably the 2 most important categories, passer rating and completion percentage. And it's wild to say completion percentage. Last year he completed a little over 66% of his passes, which is good. You want your rookie quarterback coming into the NFL to be above that 60% level. That's jumped up to 75%. He had a game a week ago where he was at 91%, set a Patriots franchise record of 20-plus pass attempts, having over 90%. Tom Brady didn't even do that. He's top 5 in the NFL in adjusted QB rating, in passing yards, in EPA, and completion percentage over expected. His dropback EPA is second in the NFL behind Daniel Jones. And look, I know there's going to be a lot of Daniel Jones hype. He is in the MVP conversation at this point in time. He's not super high in the odds, but I think that has to do with the fact that the Colts have arguably the most complete roster in the NFL. Great offensive line, obviously incredible weapons at wide receiver, the best running back in the NFL, I would argue, and a really talented defense. And they just dropped Daniel Jones right in the middle of it, and he's having an MVP caliber season. And look, we've all seen Daniel Jones. He had maybe one good season before that with the New York Giants, and he got paid quite a bit because of it. But every season outside of that, he has been a disappointing quarterback. So he was just dropped in a really great situation. And I'm not knocking anything against him. Clearly, he's thriving in that system in Indianapolis. But, there's a caveat there for the reason he's first overall in drop back EPA. Whereas Drake Maye, I think, is under a lot more consistent pressure than Daniel Jones is. And right now, speaking of pressure, the Patriots have the 10th worst quick pressure rate. And Maye continues to be one of the most efficient, if not the most efficient quarterback in the NFL. He certainly is the most efficient when it comes to gotta have it passes on either third or fourth down. Seems to complete it almost every time, when they're not running the football on those downs. You put the ball in Drake Maye's hands, he makes something happen. And the run game right now, Patriots rank 26th in yards per carry. Now, it's been better the last couple of weeks. I think they're going to probably be in the top 20 by the end of the season, the way it's improving. But 26 right now in yards per carry, the running game. 30th in the NFL in success rate. Drake Maye is carrying the entire load. They are winning games right now because of him. And look, you look at the supporting cast, it's great that Stephon Diggs is the number one wide receiver on this team. And that's a weapon we really haven't seen in New England for quite some time. But just to give you some context, last year in Houston, Stephon Diggs was the number 2, arguably the number 3 receiver in Houston before he went down midway through the season. Hunter Henry is one of the better tight ends in the NFL. I think Kayshon Boutte, you look at the contested catch percentage, he is one of the best in the NFL when it comes to that. And, Mac Hollins is the most underrated receiver on the team. I don't talk about him enough. I think defenses kind of sleep on him. He's faster than they think. He's certainly physical, can block out there. And Demario Douglas, kind of hit or miss week to week, but a decent receiver. But nobody is saying Diggs, Hunter Henry, Kayshon Boutte, Mac Hollins, and Demario Douglas is an elite NFL receiving core, right? I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And I know they have Tyquan Thornton and Juju Smith-Schuster, and they're playing pretty well in Kansas City after not doing a ton in New England, but they still have Rashee Rice. They still have Travis Kelce out there, even if he's not quite who he used to be. Still have Andy Reid, the offensive genius play caller there. I think Mahomes has more to work with than Drake Maye does, although I think it's closer than people think. But Hollywood Brown, of course, out there, speedy player. Patriots don't have a Hollywood Brown. They don't have a Rashee Rice. Maybe they kind of have a Travis Kelce with Hunter Henry. But, I just, seeing what Drake Maye is doing, sack to pressure rate, 25%, and is continuing to go out there. He was sacked 5 times from Myles Garrett the other day. Wasn't a factor. The Patriots still put up 30-plus points on the Cleveland Browns, who, heading into that game, I don't know if they are now, probably not. They were the number 1 total yards NFL defense, and Drake Maye, there were some struggles there in the first half. They couldn't get into the end zone, but just poured it on there in the third quarter and showed that he is the explosive playmaker that we all were expecting and hoping him to be. But at this point in his career, I don't think any of us thought Drake Maye it would be this. I think an interesting comparison, if we're talking about a quarterback that is having a surprising statistical season, Brock Purdy back in 2023 with the San Francisco 49ers, but look at the supporting cast that he had. He had Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, obviously out there, good running game, arguably the best offensive line in the NFL. Drake Maye's doing a lot more with less. So, comparing Drake Maye to some of the other contenders out there, we know Patrick Mahomes, you still have to call him the best quarterback in the NFL. That doesn't mean he's going to win the MVP this season, but I think number 1 pick, football draft, every player's available, every team's going to pick Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback. So he's still elite, but I do think there's going to be a bit of narrative fatigue there with Kansas City. And, if Kansas City's in a tough division, right? Denver might be the better team in the AFC West. We'll see how that ultimately plays out. The Chargers had a little bit of a lull a few weeks ago, but they look back to being what they were at the beginning of the season. Raiders obviously aren't very good, but that's a tight race in the AFC West, and if the Chargers or the Broncos win that division, my prediction, I think the Broncos will win that division, even if the Chiefs play upset in the postseason, which I think they probably will. It's going to be hard to make the argument that Patrick Mahomes deserves the MVP there. Josh Allen now finds himself in the race, kind of really snuck up in there the last week because Buffalo, after losing 2 straight games to the Patriots and then the Falcons, had a bye week and then just absolutely destroyed the Carolina Panthers. Now suddenly everyone's back on the Buffalo train. I still think the Bills are a Super Bowl contender, and they may end up winning the AFC East when all is said and done. But similar to Patrick Mahomes, I think people are going to be looking for a new storyline. You see this a lot in the NBA, right? I think LeBron James should have won half dozen more MVP awards throughout his career, but the voters, they like novelty, right? And I don't think it's quite to the same extent in the NFL, but that still exists. LeBron James continues to carry teams, and, Russell Westbrook was averaging a triple-double. James Harden had a good season, and Giannis, it's his turn to win the MVP. I think that still exists in the NFL to a certain extent. So, Mahomes has his MVPs. Josh Allen got his first one last year. I think people are going to be looking for a new story. And when you look at the supporting cast that both of those teams have, and I would argue Josh Allen has less to work with, at least on the offensive side of the football, than the Chiefs do. Certainly, they have a lot more weapons than Buffalo. It's still a tough, it's hard to compare that with Stephon Diggs on the back end of his career, Hunter Henry on the back end of his career, and Booty and Douglas and Hollins, receivers that most NFL fans don't even know about. I think Drake Maye gets the nod there, but Allen is ahead of him currently in the betting on most betting odds. I've seen a few where Drake Maye is at number 2. And then Daniel Jones, the EPA leader, but that's a team that relies so much on Jonathan Taylor, and Jonathan Taylor's also going to be in the MVP race. Now, he's a little bit further down. I don't think there's much of an appetite to give the MVP to a running back. He was in this conversation a year or two ago. Jonathan Taylor was, but, he has 14 touchdowns in 8 games. He's had, I think, 3 consecutive weeks or 4 consecutive weeks where he scored 3 touchdowns. But nobody's won, a running back hasn't won the MVP since 2006. And even if you think Jonathan Taylor or Daniel Jones should be the front runner, they're going to cannibalize votes from one another because they are the Indianapolis Colts. They play on the same team. Then, of course, there's Baker Mayfield, who I think was the front runner probably 2-3 weeks ago. But that game on the road against the Detroit Lions really set him back. Going to be interesting because that's going to be a big matchup in a couple of weeks when New England goes on the road to Tampa, and you get to compare Baker to Drake Maye. And I think the quarterback that has the better game is going to leap forward in terms of that MVP conversation. But Mayfield was up there, I think, at number 1 or number 2 a few weeks ago, and now he finds himself plus 1,000 in most of the betting markets. Dak Prescott, is really carrying the Dallas Cowboys, but they just, Dallas is not a consistent or reliable football team. I think a sneaky candidate is probably Matt Stafford. I think the Rams might be the sneaky favorite coming out of the NFC. As good as the Packers look right now, as good as the Philadelphia Eagles may be, I think the Rams might ultimately be the team to beat in that conference. And if Stafford finds themselves in the Rams with the number 1 seed heading into the playoffs, he may end up winning the MVP. So I would say, looking ahead to the rest of the season, I don't think it's going to be Daniel Jones. At a certain point, I know he has a great supporting cast, but he's going to come back to reality. I don't think it's going to be Jonathan Taylor because they're just not going to give it to a running back. I don't think it's going to be Prescott because the Cowboys are very hit or miss. Baker Mayfield, probably going to have a couple clunker games the rest of the season, but that matchup against New England in a couple weeks will be important. And I think Matthew Stafford probably will be in that mix when all is said and done. So ultimately, I think it's going to come down to Patrick Mahomes. If I had to predict, we have 9 more weeks left in the NFL season. Where are we at the end of the regular season? I think it's going to be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Drake Maye, and Matthew Stafford, and maybe Baker Mayfield in no particular order. But, you look at the numbers right now. Drake Maye, passer rating, he's 118.7, whereas Daniel Jones, who has the second best passer rating, I believe, 109.5. So he's 9 points higher than Daniel Jones. That's a big jump in terms of passer rating. Almost a 119 passer rating for Drake Maye. 2,026 passing yards versus 2,062 passing yards from Daniel Jones. So those two are both very close. Whereas Patrick Mahomes right now has, 2,099 passing yards. So he's a little bit ahead of Drake Maye there, but the passer rating's much lower, 103. Patrick Mahomes also has one more interception than Drake Maye at this point in time, which, again, looking back where we were 8 weeks ago, is a crazy thing to say. If you thought 8 weeks into the season Mahomes would have more turnovers than Drake Maye, I would say you're crazy. Josh Allen, similar 103.6 passer rating. He's only at a little over 1,500 passing yards, but you have to remember he's had a bye week recently, so that'll jump up. 4 interceptions for Allen. And then Baker Mayfield, he's below 100 with a passer rating. It does have 13 touchdown passes and is a little under 2,000 yards. What's really interesting about Drake Maye, though, so he has 2,026 passing yards 8 weeks into this season. Last year, he had 2,276 passing yards total. So he is a 250-yard game away from passing his passing yards 9 weeks into the season. That's ridiculous. He's already matched his passing touchdowns from last year. And last year he had an 88 passer rating. So he's improved by, 30 points passer rating? I mean, that's not a year 2 leap. That is, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right off the bat. And he had 10 total interceptions last year versus just 3 this year. And I know Drake Maye, didn't start until, week 6 last year. He missed almost a full game against the Jets and missed a full game against the Buffalo Bills in the season finale. So it's not apples to apples, but regardless, he played a lot more games as a starter last year, and he's already matching the numbers that he put up, at least in terms of passing yards and touchdowns, 8 to 9 weeks into the season. So, I think MVP voters, they're going to want a new storyline. The Patriots, if they can continue winning football games, big game this week against the Atlanta Falcons, who I don't think you can sleepwalk on, right? You don't know which Atlanta team you're going to get week to week. If you get the team you got last week, if Kirk Cousins is back out there, continues to struggle, the Patriots are going to win in another blowout, I'm sure. But you get the Falcons that beat the Buffalo Bills, that's going to be a tough game to win. So, I think the Patriots, they should win that game, but it's not something to sleep on. And then, of course, you're going down to Tampa in the heat and humidity in early November against one of the better teams in the NFL. And I think that's ultimately going to be the test. So, if the Patriots can continue beating up on bad teams and Drake Maye can minimize mistakes against those bad teams and pick up a couple victories in the games that should be a lot closer. Tampa, Buffalo coming to Foxborough. I think that Baltimore game is still going to be tough. I think they're going to be in full strength by then. And the Cincinnati Bengals game, who knows who you're going to get that week in Cincinnati. I mean, they lost to the Jets on Sunday, so I don't. Maybe that'll be an easier matchup. But if Drake Maye can win at least a couple of those games and they can continue to blow out and beat bad teams, and Drake Maye puts up 120, 130 passer ratings week to week against those bad teams and then looks more than competent against the good teams, then yeah, I think he will win the MVP because people love a new storyline. They're not going to want to give it to Allen again. People are kind of tired of Patrick Mahomes, and I think a lot has to do with where the Patriots finished. They're in the race right now for a first-round bye. Right now, in the playoff picture, the Indianapolis Colts have the number 1 seed, but they're only a game back. They somehow finish with the number 1 seed. 11 of the last 15 MVPs have come from teams that were the number 1 seed. So I think if New England lands the AFC number 1 seed, gets a first-round bye, Drake Maye, it's inevitable he'll win the MVP. If they're 2, they're 3, or they find themselves in the wild card losing to Buffalo, then Josh Allen may get the nod, or they'll give it back to Mahomes if if Kansas City continues to go on a tear and earns the number 1 seed themselves. If they win the AFC West division after their rough start, it would be hard not to give it to Patrick Mahomes. So there's also the big primetime games coming up. I think potentially we could see the Tampa New England game in a couple of weeks flex to game of the week on CBS, 425 game, or at the very least they're going to get the Nance Romo commentary, and that's going to be the game people want to watch. So that's going to be a big test. He's got to beat up on the Jets on Thursday Night Football in a few weeks in prime time. That'll be a spotlight test. Drake Maye's really only had one primetime game throughout his career. And then you have the Giants on Monday Night Football. Got to beat up on them. And then Week 15, third to last game of the season, you have the Buffalo Bills rematch. And if Josh Allen and Drake Maye still find themselves at the top of the betting odds, the winner of that game may end up winning the award ultimately. Now, I get the counter arguments, right? The Patriots have a soft schedule. They haven't faced many top 5 defenses, even though they faced technically what was the number 1 defense heading into Week 8 last week. But I think the soft schedule critique doesn't work if the Patriots are winning these games by 1 possession, right? But they blew out Cleveland Browns. They blew out the Carolina Panthers. They didn't blow out the Saints, but that was, I would call it a comfortable victory. And they blew out the game a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think the soft schedule critique really works if Drake Maye can continue putting up 30-plus points a game on these teams. I think one argument is sack avoidance. I think Drake Maye still has to get a little bit better at that. He's certainly better than he was last year, and I think arguably one of the better, more slippery quarterbacks in the pocket in the NFL right now. But he has to learn to avoid sacks at times. I don't think this is going to be a factor, but of course he needs to learn to slide better. He had a slide in Sunday's game that really was, his teammates were making fun of him for it. And then of course he threw a touchdown to Kayshon Boutte down the field in the next play. So does he win because of stats, or does he win because the Pats are winning? I think that's an important question. I think it has to be both, right? I think the Patriots have to win the division in the AFC East. I don't think they necessarily have to get the number 1 seed, although I think that would help a lot. I think they need to win the division, and Drake Maye, it's hard to expect him to stay as consistent as he has been and to keep putting up these ridiculous numbers, but if he stays relatively consistent to what he's been doing, and the Patriots are winning games and win the division, I think Drake Maye has to be the favorite. And I think he's probably the favorite right now in the midseason awards, which don't actually mean anything. You're not going to give it to Josh Allen, who lost to Drake Maye, and Drake Maye had a better game. You're not going to give it to Patrick Mahomes right now because Chiefs got off to a rough start this season. You're not going to give it to Matthew Stafford because the Rams are building momentum, but they lost in Philadelphia. Baker Mayfield had a bad loss against the Detroit Lions. Daniel Jones and Jonathan Taylor, sorry, I'm losing names here. Daniel Jones and Jonathan Taylor would take votes from each other. I think Drake Maye has to be the midseason MVP at this point in time. Is it midseason? I guess technically it is. Halftime, Week 9 will be midseason. So we'll see after Week 9 if Drake Maye puts up another great game against the Atlanta Falcons. But, certainly there are things to work on for Maye. I still think his mechanics are a little bit flawed, particularly from the shotgun. Michael Felger went off about this yesterday, and I happen to agree with him on it, that, Drake Maye, you got to get him on the move. And even if that's just lining up under center, dropping back, and throwing the football, his footwork is significantly better when he gets moving instead of being stagnant in the shotgun. So that's something he needs to improve on. I think he needs a quicker release, needs to slide a little bit better. But hard to beat the decision-making, right? The decision-making, as I said, watching Justin Herbert this season and then watching Drake Maye, even watching Josh Allen and them stand in the pocket and try to go through the progression and bailing on the play and running with the football, Drake Maye has been better than those quarterbacks, and which is wild. He looks like a 6-7 year NFL veteran right now, and he looks like the best quarterback in the NFL. So I think he deserves a midseason MVP. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. Curious to hear from you. But this obviously is a big surprise, right? And I think a lot of the credit has to go to Josh McDaniels. He made Mac Jones number 2 in the Offensive Rookie of the Year voting his last year in New England before he came back. I like Mac Jones, and he's done an okay job in San Francisco, but, he obviously was not the second best rookie in that class, and he would have won it if Jamar Chase didn't have a ridiculous season that year. But look, Drake Maye is on pace for 4,000 yards, 30-plus touchdowns. The Patriots could be not just the division winner, but potentially the top seed in the AFC. We're talking face of the league potential. We're going to see way too many Drake Maye State Farm ads as he heads into year 3 of his career. So that's something to look forward to. But really a pleasant surprise. Just everything with Drake Maye, everything with the Patriots, the pass protection with the offensive line, which, is hit or miss. Certainly, fumbled a little bit last week against Cleveland Browns and that ridiculous pass rush that they have. But the receivers have been better. The defense has looked a lot better the last few weeks, other than, of course, the first possession of the game. The special teams, although Bryce Behringer has been struggling a lot this season, but I don't think anyone's complaining about Andy Borregales at this point in time. I think that was the right decision, even though I was the one saying it should be Parker Romo back at the end of training camp. Really interesting to see if Drake Maye can keep this up, and if he keeps this up and the Patriots keep winning the way they are, I think he's ultimately going to win that MVP award, which is nuts. But other news, Marcus Jones was extended today by the New England Patriots, another 3 years. Love this move. Maybe Bill Belichick's last good draft pick. I think he was at a University of Houston. Obviously a small corner, slipped to the mid-rounds there. He has been so impressive this season. I think my issue with Marcus Jones the last couple of years is just he's small and he can't guard bigger receivers. Now he's going up against some of the biggest tight ends in the NFL, and he's having pass breakups against them. He plays a lot bigger than he looks out there. And then, of course, you can't overlook what he does in the punt return game and all that he brings to the table there. So I'm really excited to see Marcus Jones back for years to come. Again, I think that was Bill Belichick's last good draft pick. They got a foundation. They got some foundational players here now. Eventually they're going to extend Christian Gonzalez probably this offseason. Drake Maye, franchise quarterback of the future, he'll get an extension. Will Campbell, looking more than competent as your left tackle. I think Jared Wilson has been hit or miss this season, but, he's a smart player that when he's an NFL veteran will be more than reliable out there on the offensive line. Kayshon Boutte looks like a real NFL wide receiver number 2. I think Demario Douglas will probably stick around when all is said and done. They've actually built a pretty good foundation here. And, even Travion Henderson, right? He's been a bit of a disappointment up until last week, and now, you get him rushing to the outside, attack the edge, and you can bring out the best of him, and I think he'll get better when it comes to pass blocking, which he was terrific at in college, and he'll get better at running between the tackles. I'm sure he'll bulk up as he heads into year 2. So, offensively, there's a real foundation there. Now, down the road, right, Stephon Diggs isn't going to be there forever. Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper aren't going to be there forever. There's going to be some positions they need to address. Right tackle with Morgan Moses, who's up there in age. Michael Wenu, how long is he going to be great? I think Bradbury's probably a stopgap center. You're going to need to address that position. Maybe that's ultimately Jared Wilson's down the road. But great foundation, and really excited to see Marcus Jones. I know I was just talking about the offense, but he's that defensive foundational piece that you want alongside Christian Gonzalez, alongside Christian Barmore. Even the safeties that the Patriots have are pretty good, right? They've been more than impressive this season. So excited to see Marcus Jones sticking around, well-deserved, and hard to complain about Elliott Wolf. Maybe Kyle Williams will end up ultimately being a dud, but they're going to work him in, and hopefully he'll get some more opportunities out there. But between Stretch and Vrabel and Ryan Cowden and Elliott Wolf, the collaboration seems to be working. And I think at the end of the day, Vrabel's the one who makes the final calls, so he probably deserves the most credit. But I think with Mike Vrabel, I wouldn't go as far to call it resentment, but, he inherited a lot of this team, right? He flipped more than half the roster in the offseason, but, the fact that he likes Marcus Jones and is willing to extend him, just comes to show that, like, the Patriots actually have some good players that weren't just acquired before Mike Vrabel got here, and we're starting to see those young guys come into their own. Obviously, Drake Maye is the number one guy, but, assuming they can continue to patch up the offensive line in the coming years, they can continue to, replace Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper when they have to, bring in that next successor tight end, eventually bring in a number one wide receiver that's young and can be that guy for years to come. Patriots are going to be a tough team to beat, and it's pretty hilarious, right? I think us Pats fans, we sit here and say we had 6 rough seasons, and the rest of the league looks at Patriots fans and goes, no, you didn't struggle, right? You had 2 bad seasons, 2 mediocre seasons, and that's it since Tom Brady left, right? And now you have the coach, you have the quarterback, and you're not the Cleveland Browns, right? They've been struggling to find the quarterback for 30 plus years now, since they reignited that franchise and had the expansion in Cleveland. They haven't had a real quarterback. And there's a lot of teams, that's the worst example, but there's a lot of teams that find themselves in that boat for 10 to 15 years looking for the guy. And, we hoped Mac Jones would be that guy. Obviously, there were some limitations there. Cam Newton was a stopgap. Bailey Zappi obviously wasn't going to be that guy. They now have Drake Maye. They now have one of the most disciplined head coaches in the NFL, who earns a lot of respect from his players. I think that was one of the issues in Tennessee. In addition to Mike Vrabel not getting along with the GM there and him not having much of a say, he was seen as kind of that drill sergeant head coach. And as I've talked about many times on this podcast, teams go back and forth between the player-friendly coach and the drill sergeant coach because one doesn't work out and they switch to the other, and that doesn't work out and they go back and forth. And the Patriots kind of did that with Belichick to Gerard Mayo, back to Mike Vrabel, but I think Mike Vrabel is a bit of both. He was a former player. He gets the respect across the board, not just from the players, but from the coaches. He's been there before, and he's had success. Brought the Tennessee Titans to the AFC title game, won Coach of the Year. He's probably near the top of the list for Coach of the Year this season. So it's an exciting time to be a New England Patriots fan. Is it Dynasty 2.0? It's too early to say that, but the news just gets better week after week. So as long as Drake Maye stays healthy, they can continue to improve and not rest on their laurels too much, winning these football games. We could be looking at a Super Bowl contender for years to come, and that's really exciting to say after a difficult couple of years where the Patriots went 4-13 2 years in a row. But that's it for this episode of Patscast. If you like this video and you're watching on YouTube, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, or subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'll see you very soon.